It's okay to want an abortion. Did you know 1 in 4 people who can get pregnant will have one? So it's actually more common than most people think. At CareFM, you can choose what type of abortion care works best for you. We have in-person locations with private entrances in Atlanta, Chicago, and the Washington, D.C. areas. And we also offer medically supported abortion pills by mail in 20 states. For some people, it's more comforting to come into a private office where they can sit with one of our medical providers and either leave no longer pregnant or with abortion pills in hand. For others, they prefer to get abortion pills through the mail so they can decide the best time and place to complete the process. Getting abortion pills by mail from CareFM is simple. Fill out an online form, and a licensed provider will review your medical history. And if eligible, your medication will be shipped to you in a couple of days. Kara, our text-based abortion companion, will guide you through the process from start to finish with instructions, reminders, and answers to all your questions whenever they come up 24/7. With either choice, please know CareFM will support you every step of the way. Learn more at carefm.org.
In Walmart's Who Newville, joy started to grow. For online-only savings sure to steal the show. Tech treats and toys so dazzling and new. Walmart Cyber Monday deal soon ready for you. It's online only with very little time to spare. December 1st will soon be here, so be sure to be there. The Who's are prepared. Are you ready too? A day packed with savings. Amazing! Who knew? Subject to availability, terms and fees apply.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. You're ready to move your business forward, but first, you need to find the right team. Start your search with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It can help you reach qualified candidates fast, ensuring your listing is the first one they see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. See the results for yourself. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
You get a very skewed picture often of antiquity, depending on the point of view of the translator. And particularly, I think, when it comes to women, the kind of words that some male translators have used are not accurate, to say the least. There's a lot of sort of hussy, for example. There's a lot of tart, slut, words that don't necessarily bear much correlation to the original Greek or Latin.
Hello. Boudicca, Cleopatra, Artemisia and Olympias are just a few of the many women of the ancient world that we know about, but it's significant that we know about them from male writers. This gives a certain perspective, not necessarily inaccurate, but it can be. Today I'm speaking with a classicist who writes about antiquity, having gone direct to the sources and translating them herself, and has written a quite wonderful history of ancient Greece and Rome that is unusual in the discipline for saying something new. My guest is Daisy Dunn, and she's the author of The Missing Thread, and we talk about some of the key female figures from Greece. Artemisia, a naval commander from the west coast of Asia Minor fighting for the Persians, and Olympias, the mother of Alexander the Great. We delve into a number of other areas for a most stimulating chat. Coming up, I have Peter Stothard joining to discuss the Roman poet Horace, and then Ian McGregor joins to talk about the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. So please do share the pod with friends and family, and if you can give a 5-star rating, I'll be in your debt. But until then, it's me talking Artemisia and Olympias with Daisy Dunn. Daisy, thank you very much for joining me. It's a real pleasure to have you on.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Well, we're here to talk about your book, which is now out in paperback. But I've been meaning to get in touch to speak to you about it because I've enjoyed it so much. And it's called The Missing Thread. And importantly, it's the ancient, basically a history of the ancient world, but told not about women, but through women, which is a very important distinction that you make in your introduction, which I wanted to sort of ask you about first, because I suppose the temptation maybe with publishers is, we need a book about women. And so what was the difference and why did you want to do what you've done?
Well, I came to this book with sort of a huge ambition, which was to create a new history of the ancient world, because I have so many of these histories of the ancient world at home. Um, but the ones that I have weren't completely satisfying to me, just because I noticed that maybe you'd have a mention of Boudicca in them, you'd have a mention of Cleopatra. You had this are the same old women who came up in this book, but in sort of a short little format. But actually, there are very, very few women who featured in these great narratives of the ancient world. And I just thought, isn't that bizarre? I mean, I was just curious as to what they were doing because I actually didn't know. I couldn't say, okay, during the Peloponnesian War, women's part was X. You know, these were the women who were playing a very prominent role during the Persian Wars. And I actually wanted to know from a personal point of view what roles women played in the grand sort of narrative, the grand arc of history. And as you say, I mean, the easier kind of publishing friendly model of a book to write would have been a history of the ancient world in 10 women or something. You know, I could have chosen Cleopatra, I could have chosen Boudicca. And I think that would have taken me probably a fraction. Well, I know it would have taken me a fraction of the time that it did take. But I just didn't feel like this was actually a sort of satisfying model for me. You know, I really wanted to have this burning desire to actually make sense of the entirety of antiquity over 3,000 years. I say entirety. The book ends in AD 69 because there's clearly room for a second volume. At some stage, I had to sort of limit it because I wanted to begin very, very early in the Bronze Age, and there's only so many years you can fit into a single book binding. But within that period, I wanted to be as complete as possible and to incorporate as many different women as I could find in the sources. So that's why I adopted this approach.
Okay, well, I wanted to sort of chat with you about a few things in the book. So, but one thing I noticed that interested me is that I think you've done your own translations,
Mm.
um, and that's quite important because I mean, certainly, okay, speaking from my own point of view, from an undergraduate degree, all the books all the primary sources were translated by men. And so, you know, that's a perspective that I guess for many hundreds of years was the kind of the sort of standard how we looked into the ancient world. And so, did you find when you were doing your own translations that actually, you know, there's a perspective here that's been completely missed?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm a classicist, and my sort of my training is very much to approach all the material in the original. You know, I will read everything in the Greek, I'll read everything in the Latin, and work from scratch because I've realized actually over years of reading translations which have been written anywhere between either the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries and the modern day, you get a very skewed picture often of antiquity, depending on the point of view of the translator. And particularly, I think when it comes to women, you know, the kind of words that some male translators have used are not accurate to say the least. You know, there's a lot of sort of hussy, for example. There's a lot of tart, slut, you know, words that don't necessarily bear much correlation to the original Greek or Latin. So I needed to go back and actually have a look at what was actually said about these women, because there's no point in perpetuating a myth that's probably a product of the age in which these men were writing. And I think it also just it brings me as a historian so much closer to the events that are being described, to the people who are being described, to actually be touching the words that were written about them, to be interpreting them through my own experience as well. I think that's just incredibly important, and where I've sort of included translations in the book. I mean, at the very beginning of each chapter, I've actually translated women's writing because that in itself is quite a rarity in the ancient world in terms of survival. Most of the writing that we have surviving from the ancient world is by men. So I'm used to translating men more than I am by women. Every classicist is. So to actually encounter some of these words which are written by women and sort of have the sort of privilege of translating them and rendering them anew, that was something really special. You know, it was really important to me that I should be able to carry some of these original women's words into the book and put them there right up front at the beginning of every chapter.
Yes, that's something that's quite innovative. I mean, this isn't I'm not, well, okay, I don't know all the books that have been published, but this seems sort of quite unusual approach to take.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Depressingly so, I suppose.
Depressingly so. I mean, this is the difficulty, isn't it? I mean, one of the questions I'm asked a lot, well, how do you write a book which is centered on women in the ancient world, when 99% of your sources are written by men? And this is the problem. I mean, this is the big barrier that you have when you write a book like this. But my response is usually that we do have women's writing. There were women who were writing poetry. There were women who were writing works of history. And the very fact that their work wasn't preserved tells an important story in itself in terms of what was deemed important by the people who were preserving and keeping these manuscripts. And there's also the fact that we have a huge amount of evidence from the archaeological record. We have art, we have works of philosophy, we have sort of other ways of seeing women and bringing them together with these written historical literary sources which are produced predominantly by men.
Yes, it's interesting that. And I suppose it contrasts with the richness of female characters in the ancient world because there are just so many. It's almost odd that so little sort of female writing survives.
It's such a pity because I think you get such a clear picture of the centrality of a lot of these women to even, sort of poetic circles in Rome. Women were there, producing work which was being shared with men. Men were reading it. Men were reading Sappho, who's we do have fragments of her work, and they were saying, she's a genius. She is the female equivalent of Homer. And actually, men in the ancient world, of course, they could be hugely misogynistic, they could be sexist, they could be this, that, and the other. But actually, I found them on the whole a lot more interested in women's work than later men who are writing the histories, which is a slightly sad indictment of the modern age.
Dear, oh dear. Okay, right. Well, I need to make sure I don't misbehave on this. But what I'm interested, you start off with this interesting tale because I was reading. I interviewed Robin Lane Fox, who wrote a book about Homer and his Iliad. This is no doubt where Robin Lane Fox stands on this front. But the story of Fantasia, which is this hoax that has endured. I wanted to ask you about this because I really enjoyed reading about it, and I don't think I even knew about it. But uh, it's fascinating.
It is. This is astonishing. I mean, I'm a huge. I'll say from the start, I'm a huge fan of Robin Lane Fox and his work, and he did this fantastic new book on Homer, and as you say, his Iliad, and he's taken a slightly controversial view in identifying the Iliad as the product of a single imagination, a single mind, one Homer, which is controversial because actually through a lot of history, we've said, oh, the Iliad, the Odyssey, they are products of the oral tradition. They've been passed down by several bards. They were added to, bits were incorporated by, lots of poets. And basically, there are lots and lots of different Homers rather than one Homer. But in antiquity, this wasn't so much seen to be the case. People believed that there was a Homer. And there was this great mystery over Homer, who Homer was. People didn't know, even in ancient times. So because of this mystery, there was room for hoaxes. There was room for guesses as to who this person might have been. And the strangest idea that I came across was that Homer was actually a fraud and he was a poet who copied his work, or at least sort of stole the idea from a woman called Fantasia, she'd come up with the idea for the Iliad and the Odyssey. And she'd written them out and deposited them on some papyri and entrusted those papyri to a temple in Egypt. And then Homer had come along and been so sort of besotted with what he read that he took them away and used them as a basis for creating his own poetry. And this sounds incredibly bizarre. You're thinking, actually, is there any credibility in this whatsoever? And you go to the Library of Alexandria, it's a great sort of age of discovery, where people are really putting together the works of Homer and other authors as well and storing them. And you find a scholar who actually takes seriously the suggestion that there was an original Fantasia. And this work that this guy provided, describing the Iliad and the Odyssey as the work of Fantasia, was then picked up by later scholars through history. And it kind of snowballs. You get people actually building on this theory that Fantasia was a woman. She created the stories, that Homer was really this, this copycat based on her. But all along, the truth was sort of staring them in the face, because fantasia is a Greek word and it means essentially a fantasy. It means a front. It means someone who isn't real. The whole idea was a fake. This was basically an elaborate joke by the scholar in Alexandria who came across this idea, wrote it down, and perpetuated it. And people were willing to believe it because they said, well, look, the Odyssey in itself has a lot of women in it. It's full of goddesses. It's concerned with Penelope. And there are lots of mistakes in the Odyssey, and they're kind of technical mistakes that no man would possibly make, because the mistakes are about sort of things like boat building and being able to sort of cut down trees and get wood that was suitable for boat building directly from those trees without having to dry it out. Or, ships with two rudders. No man would make such a stupid mistake. Clearly, this was the product of a woman. So you have some quite interesting theories coming up all the way through to the 19th century, the 20th century as well. Robert Graves really buys into the theory that there is a female Homer. And I think we can laugh at this. We think this is absolutely ridiculous. But to me, it's sort of captures something quite interesting about the poems. And that is the fact that these poems are set in an age in which women were actually more prominent than they were in later times. Certainly in Homer's time, we're talking about sort of the 8th century BC. These stories of the epics are set earlier than that. They're in the late Bronze Age. And if you look back at the archaeology of the late Bronze Age, you do find women playing a much more prominent role than they did later. So I like to sort of credit, the whole ridiculousness of this theory with actually some basis in reality.
I know in the introduction you write about Pandora, and obviously, we must discuss the first woman. But I mean, reading back, and I haven't read Hesiod in a while, so I read it through your book, and it doesn't. He'd be cancelled nowadays, wouldn't he?
You see, it would no doubt be cancelled, and that's a really sad thing to say. I mean, he has some choice one-liners in there. He says things like, "No, don't trust a woman ever. She's only looking for your barn. Don't be taken in by her wheedling words and her shapely bottom." I think he says, these women are just out to beguile you, and they're all a very bad lot. They're no good. He was clearly of his time, I think is the phrase we would use today. He was sort of living in the 7th century BC. He was a farmer. He became a poet. And he gives us the first really full story of Pandora, the first full telling of the Pandora myth. And Pandora is the first woman. And the origins of all evils on earth are supposed to originate with this first woman. And it kind of gets worse and worse and worse as you go along, as you get more women populating the earth, more problems arise. And that's genuinely Hesiod's viewpoint.
And with Sappho, who I don't know, has Sappho become increasingly more influential in the sort of last 20 years amongst classicists?
I think so. I think there's a new recognition of how special Sappho is for a start, because we actually have a body of her work. And I say body, most of it is still fragmentary. They're bits of papyrus, but we have bits of poetry. We have supposedly some new poems which are still being sort of examined for their authenticity. So that's helped spark this interest. But I think more than that, there's an understanding that she was a figure who gained a lot of authority in the ancient world. I mean, the fact that you have men writing about how brilliant she is, you have men saying that she was one of the 9 best female poets in history. Someone actually provides a list, and she's very much top of that list. I think on the basis and on the authority of these ancient authors, she's gained some prominence today. And I think, I'm always in two minds when you have people trying to sort of represent women from the ancient world in a new light. So, is she a beacon for feminism? Is she a sort of trailblazer for women's rights? I feel like we're probably going too far if we're trying to sort of reinvent Sappho. And I say reinvent Sappho in that way. It feels sort of slightly jarring to describe her in those terms. But I think she was certainly a very impressive woman. She was a very clever woman. She had a difficult life that saw her sent off into exile, probably to Sicily for a time. She was living in a very politically tumultuous time. And poetry was still, a man's world, and she managed to make her own name in that world. She taught students, she taught girls poetry, so she passed her skill down. And I think she was respected for all of those things. I think that makes her a figure of interest today. And I think that's enough, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very lucky to do it in the 90s, to study Sappho in the 90s, which I'm not sure how prevalent that was. But we had quite a progressive module at my university, sex and gender in the ancient world.
Really, I did the same.
Oh, right.
Yeah, which did seem really progressive at the time. It seemed very, very different from all the other courses, which are, you know, late Republican Rome, or I don't know, Plotinus, or quite sort of traditional modules. But I did exactly the same module as you, and I think that was fantastic because it introduced me, anyway, probably you'd say the same, to like a range of female writers who I'd never have come across, sort of the early church mothers, people like that came up in it, sort of understanding relations between women and men. I think it's just absolutely crucial to actually your broader understanding of the ancient world and all those other historical sources that you might be reading in some of those more traditional modules. So yeah, I'm pleased you did that as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was a lot of fun. We also studied food and drink in the Mediterranean, which was a lot of fun.
Wow. I
Yeah.
didn't do food and drink.
Right. Well, I went to Warwick, and we had some lecturers there who were just they were a lot of fun. The one who taught food and drink, he described a time when they had him and his fellow dons at Oxford at the time or something had found an amphora in the Mediterranean, and they had had a Greek, they reenacted a Greek symposium and mixed the remains of the wine, which was, a few sort of crystals in the bottom of the amphora, with water to sort of connect back to the ancient world. Apparently, it was revolting, but that's what they that's what they said they did.
I mean,
Um,
I find that astonishingly bold. I think I would never taste something that's come up out of the soil from 2000 years ago. I mean, that's astonishing.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know whether to believe it or not, but there was the sort of characters who were running the course.
It sounds brilliant. I think food and drinks are always an interesting subject, as I think is when you look at sort of recipes and things, even the most luxurious dishes, things like flamingo or I don't know, ostrich or these, I mean, dormouse
Yes,
stuffed with
dormouse
whatever.
inside a rabbit or something.
Yeah, or like something in a something else in a something else. These kind of, I don't know what you call them, sort of, but there's a modern name, isn't it, for these, you see them at
Yes.
Christmas where you get one animal inside another. This is a very sort of Roman thing. And it's the most modern palates. It looks quite unedifying.
It's okay to want an abortion. Did you know 1 in 4 people who can get pregnant will have one? So it's actually more common than most people think. At CareFM, you can choose what type of abortion care works best for you. We have in-person locations with private entrances in Atlanta, Chicago, and the Washington, D.C. areas. And we also offer medically supported abortion pills by mail in 20 states. For some people, it's more comforting to come into a private office where they can sit with one of our medical providers and either leave no longer pregnant or with abortion pills in hand. For others, they prefer to get abortion pills through the mail so they can decide the best time and place to complete the process. Getting abortion pills by mail from CareFM is simple. Fill out an online form, and a licensed provider will review your medical history. And if eligible, your medication will be shipped to you in a couple of days. Kara, our text-based abortion companion, will guide you through the process from start to finish with instructions, reminders, and answers to all your questions whenever they come up 24/7. With either choice, please know CareFM will support you every step of the way. Learn more at carefm.org.
Hello, Ollie here. Please forgive my interruption, but I wanted to let you know that at Aspects of History, we produce a digital magazine featuring articles, interviews, short stories, and book reviews of the best historical writing available. Authors featured including Ben Macintyre, Lucy Worsley, Andrew Roberts, and plenty more. An annual subscription is available for only $9.99. That's pounds or dollars. Yep, you heard that right. That's 6 issues for under £10 or dollars. Head over to aspectsofhistory.com to subscribe, where you can also gift subscriptions. Now back to the show. Right. So we digress, but I wanted to ask you about so one figure who I remember at the time studying was Artemisia, and
Mm.
you write about her in an interesting way, and also the way she's dealt with by Herodotus is very interesting, and she comes from the same city as him, but she's given sort of prophetic words which are of course
Mm.
ignored, as is the habit in the ancient world with women who can predict the future.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting. And then she does something that's almost I hesitate to say Odyssean in the Battle of Salamis, but again, she's got this sort of cunning to her as well. And why do you think that Herodotus wrote about Artemisia in this way?
Well, I think when you read Herodotus and you come across these passages about Artemisia, the first thing that strikes you, or strikes me anyway, is how much he admired her. You feel a sense of awe for her. And I think that came primarily from the fact, as you say, they came from the same place. Herodotus is from Halicarnassus, which is modern Bodrum in Turkey. So he feels some kind of kinship with her. But beyond that, I think there's a sense that she is someone who is set apart from the armies which are engaged in the Greco-Persian wars. She seems almost like a goddess who is visiting upon these armies. There's a sort of very intractable conflict between the two sides. And it's almost like she is sent by the gods to resolve the issue. I mean, you get the sense of this otherworldliness to her, even though she's familiar to Herodotus by virtue of her geography and the kind of the remit of her power. She seems almost superhuman. And I think maybe that is a result of the fact that what she did is so extraordinary. I mean, she is the only female naval commander on either side of the Greco-Persian wars. She is there, she sinks an allied ship in order to deceive the enemy. And supposedly this is part of the act that inspires Xerxes to say that his men have become women and his women have become men, because it seems so unlikely that you'd have a woman taking such important strategic decisions right away there in the middle of a naval battle. But beyond that, I mean, Xerxes is summoning her for advice. And again, and I think when you read this, you're thinking, is this true? Or is this part of Herodotus's fantasy that this sort of very bizarre woman should suddenly appear within this narrative? Does Herodotus elevate her does he elevate her role and exaggerate her? But actually, I think the more I thought about it, and I read these pages so many times in Greek, and I sort of looked at sort of the broader history as well. I think it's entirely credible that she was giving advice to Xerxes, that he was calling upon her for a viewpoint, because he was getting increasingly frustrated with his male advisors. We have Mardonius, we have other people sort of within this circle. And I just think he needs an outsider's viewpoint. She's an ally of him, but she is an outsider. And she's trusted as a woman as well. She's the person that Xerxes entrusts his children to in a crucial moment of the war to sort of lead them to safety. And she's an anomaly. And I think, as you say, so historically, women don't have much track record for being believed and being trusted and being listened to when they give advice. And that's certainly the case in the very first instance. Xerxes ignores the advice that she gives him. But then that's not the only time he calls upon her. He calls her back again, and he's determined to listen to her more. I think the second time, we sort of think of Cassandra, the Trojan princess who's sort of destined never to be believed, even though she can speak prophecies of the future. Herodotus had the same idea, really. He was very comfortable with putting prophetic words and other words in the mouths of women, particularly women like Artemisia, because no one had recorded what was said. It was he saw it as completely legitimate for a historian to be able to make up narrative, to write dialogue within the histories, to bring it to life. But I think as modern historians, we can be fine with that. I think we accept, okay, these are not written down verbatim. He wasn't there writing down things shorthand to put into his history. We know that. But we still get a very good vision. We get a very good idea of the place and the status occupied by these people and the kind of conversations they might have been having. So I think to him, Artemisia was just an anomaly and extraordinary for being so.
Well, another great woman that I wanted to speak to you about that again you write about really well in the book is Olympias, who is I think my favorite woman of the ancient world, and I certainly remember her, and I think she's been written about quite negatively again until recently, which I don't know what you think about that, but she is just quite this kind of, I don't know. I was reading my Aubrey de Selincourt translation,
Hmm.
and he says that she's a headstrong character. Now, I haven't gone through to check how many characters were headstrong in his translation, but I wonder if that's another one of these male translators. You know, she's she's got she's a bit sort of uppity.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think headstrong has slightly negative connotations now, doesn't it? It kind of means you're, there's something a bit weird about being so sort of decisive and so bold. And you don't find many men being described as headstrong. I think it's definitely more of a female adjective that you get in translations. And I think, I mean, with for Olympias in particular, I can see exactly why he chose that word. So she's the mother of Alexander the Great, we should probably say. She was married to Philip II. He was notoriously uxorious. He married many, many times. He was by no means a sort of monogamous ruler. And this in itself made him and made her actually quite weird to the people who were writing sort of in Greece. But there's the Macedonian court. They saw them as very, very different. Some of the people who were writing about them, because the virtue of their marriage arrangements, their nature of their rule, the way that they lived was very, very different. And I think this helps to characterize Olympias as a slightly bizarre figure. And this begins early in her life. So one of the first descriptions of her is when she's a youth and she's practicing snake charming. And she meets Philip supposedly at these religious rites on the island of Samothrace, I think it is. And he's completely supposedly bewitched, and use the word bewitched by her, with this sort of this snake activity that she seems to be keen on, and it's part of these kind of chthonic sort of underworld rites. So from the very beginning, we have this picture of her as being this slightly weird, slightly exotic woman who is there right at the center of the Macedonian court. And then, because of the fact that she is only one of the wives, and Philip has several potential heirs, including a son who's older than Alexander, she is seen to be pushy because Alexander is clearly the one who ends up succeeding Philip II. So how did that happen unless there was a very pushy mother behind the scenes, really negotiating, really trying to assert the status of her son over the half brother of Alexander, who we're told had some, it's very unclear from the sources, but had some kind of developmental disability or something which made him seem to be less sort of likely to be a safe pair of hands when he grew up. So Olympias takes on this very sort of marginal kind of role within the narrative until she's right there at the center of the action. She is the one who seems to be pushing Alexander to the fore. Aristotle is employed as his tutor. He seems to have everything kind of going for him. And then as time progresses, suddenly we're getting this sort of falling away, which is seen to be suspicious of potential sort of rivals to Alexander. And we have Olympias fighting wars as well during sort of the later period. So she's clearly a figure of interest. And I think for the most part, she's very negatively portrayed, as you say, and this has been continued in the modern record as well.
Yeah, I think she's a hugely positive figure from the ancient world. I just don't understand it myself. I mean, and one area that I do think that she should, I'm highly suspicious of her involvement in the murder of Philip, along with Alexander.
Mm.
You know, as a team. Of course, we'll never know, but I think that's something to be viewed positively. You know, I mean, regicide was a pretty common thing in the Macedonian royal family,
Yes.
um, and Alexander was probably right to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting way of looking at the picture because, as you say, it's a very different culture. You know, we're talking about a minute ago sort of Sappho and sort of, you know, the Persian Wars. We're talking about a very different type of kingdom and setup of rule. And Philip II, he's expanded this kingdom drastically, and actually, it's very shaky in terms of the future. And so, if Olympias isn't there trying to sort of arrange things and put things in order and sort of potentially sort of help Alexander along, there is a real danger the whole thing is going to disintegrate. And we see what happens after Alexander's death. I mean, the system is unwieldy. It's massive. You can't sort of hold it together. So I think all of her intentions were right. I think she was very, very aware of the precarious nature of what Philip had created and had a sort of a long view of what needed to be done in order to sustain it.
Now, one thing I was very interested in, which links back to what we were talking about at the beginning, is when Olympias is having trouble with the regent of Macedon and firing off letter after letter to Alexander. And there's a very famous quote, which I don't think that does not appear in your book because I now wanted to ask you about this, which is where Alexander and in Arian, again, Aubrey's a Selincourt's not coming out of this podcast very well, but he translates, as others have as well, I think, that Alexander apparently said that Olympias charges a heavy rent for 9 months in the womb. Now you don't translate it in that way, and I wanted to ask you about that.
Hmm.
What is that? Because, you know, this is again a slightly sexist way of translating Arian's words.
I think it is. I mean, to put it in context, I mean, this is a really difficult time in Alexander's life. So the picture we get in Arrian and other sources is that while he's away expanding the empire, he's left Macedonia in the hands of his regent, Antipater, and his mother is interfering, is the sort of the picture we get. And there's a real tussle that's presented in the sources between the regent and Olympias, and they're both complaining constantly to Alexander about each other. And this supposedly weighs very, very heavily upon Alexander, and lots of words are attributed to him, including the words you say about her exacting a very heavy fee or heavy rent for carrying him for 9 months. And I think, you know, in his despair, possibly, maybe he did say these words. It's very, very difficult with any of these words to know exactly how they've come down to us. Where do they come from? If they are true, then it would very much represent a sort of complete exasperation, I think, on his part. But the way that he eventually settles this is that he comes down on his mother's side, really. I mean, the regent is the one who suffers and has to sort of give up some of his responsibilities in order to maintain the peace. And I think with Olympias, she is undoubtedly aware of the trickiness of the situation, but she has every confidence that as the mother of Alexander, that she is going to prevail. And that is what happens. And I do wonder about a lot of these words which are attributed to her and to Alexander and others. I mean, I think it's sort of almost a similar quote to that one as one where he talks about his sister, Cleopatra, essentially being, because of her birth and because of her position, he says that she is owed a little fun, essentially, i.e., that she should be allowed to have relationships with men after she's widowed. And that also seems an extraordinary thing to say. And it presents quite an interesting picture of Alexander, I think. I mean, it gives us an idea that he's quite free-witted, he's quite spirited, which isn't the picture that we get, I think, when you're just focusing on the military side of what he's doing. So I'm interested in them. And I think I just had to be very selective when I was incorporating sort of these things into my narrative. I was, on the whole, having to decide what to leave out rather than what to include. And my decisions were always swayed by trying to put women at the fore rather than the men. So I don't, what do you have some thoughts on that quote? I mean, would you
Well, I
say?
don't. I don't know. I mean, it's always difficult because, ultimately we're talking about Alexander, who is a man, and I feel like I'm doing the women in his life a disservice but sadly, that's how they're known because of Alexander. I mean, if
Mm,
Alexander had died in infancy, would we know about Olympias?
probably not.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? And I think you're already aware of this when you write this kind of book as well, that the women you know most about are the ones who are closest to men in power, just because that is the way that sources are created. You know, people write about people in power, so the people who are around them are included. But, you know, a lot of ordinary people, you have to rely on other kinds of evidence in order to actually get them into the story at all.
But I agree with what you're saying in that this different perspective adds to the view of Alexander because, generally speaking, it's the campaigning, which of course is such a key part of his life. But it you don't really know what life's like for him, once the battle's over and he's behind his tent door,
Mm, mm.
and writing letters to his mother and to his sister. That it gives a different impression of him.
Yeah, I get the impression they were quite close. I mean, I think particularly the fact that he comes out on his mother's side. I do feel that it would be wrong to say he's governed by her, but I think he certainly respects her and he trusts her and he trusts her judgment. Sometimes if he is on the fence, I feel that he would have probably taken her word, but that's the impression I get from what I've read.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, this what we've been talking about, and we're right at the end of talking, but this is really just scratching the surface of what you've written about. So I would encourage listeners, if you want a new perspective of the ancient world, you should definitely check out Daisy's book. Links are, of course, in the show notes. But Daisy, this just leaves me to thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed chatting about the missing thread.
Oh, me too. I think it's flown by. I feel like we should now go and sort of get some stuffed dormice and drink some old dregs of wine to celebrate the sort of
We
the end and do
should,
a toast to those women.
and we haven't even done the Romans, which I can live without, but I'm being harsh.
Well, there's more to enjoy in the book then.
There is Fulvia. Fulvia is a very good section on Fulvia. I'm a big fan of hers. And
Me
Mark
too.
Antony, a terrible human being, and I always used to admire him.
Oh, no. No,
Yeah,
your view completely changed, I think, military, I think yeah, as a military
it's the
strategist,
military thing
yeah.
that ruins it for men, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And I just think it's power corrupting all the way through. This is the problem. It's a recurrent theme.
I I still do think Alexander's great, though.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you that. I mean, I think, Alexander is an integral part of our history. You can't have a history of the ancient world without Alexander. But I think what I wanted to show is that he's definitely not working in isolation. We've got all of those marriages as well for a start, you know.
Absolutely, it's very convincing. Well, Daisy, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. Links are in the show notes. Please share with friends and family. And if you want to get in touch, you can through X or email history@aspectsofhistory.com. But until then, thank you and good night.